y'all. Welcome to another edition of Tea Time with Tanya. And today I have my awesome PR girl, Miss Janelle. I want to let you guys know about a little something about Janelle. She is not in entertainment PR. She is not in any of that glitzy, glamoury stuff. She actually does the work that makes the world go round. She is working in the industry that is doing incredible things in storytelling for you nonprofit organizations and organizations that are really telling stories that affect real lives. So without further ado, Miss Janelle, let the people know a little bit more about you, what you're doing now, and what is PR to you?
All right. Well, first, I want to start off and just say thank you, Miss Tanya, for having me as a guest on your show today. Like she said, my name is Janel Forsythe. My pronouns are she, her. And am born and raised in the Philly area, but now I live and work full time in Washington, D.C. I am a communications consultant for a firm called UpShift Strategies. We primarily work with nonprofit organizations as well as a lot of 501c4 organizations. So those that do more like active lobbying and government relations to move public policy for a host of progressive political causes. And that's just been something that I've been doing now for over a year. Prior to that role, I worked as the social media editor for a nonprofit, nonpartisan watchdog group called the Project on Government Oversight. And before that, I had served as the digital communications manager for a think tank in DC called the National Academy of Social Insurance. So that's just about me professionally. And then just in terms of personal life, I would say that I'm a really big traveler. I just came back from Miss Tanya's neck of the woods over in California. I did a solo trip to San Francisco as well as a few days in Disneyland, which was a lot of fun. And just when I'm back in DC, I love to go out, hang out with friends, go to museums, try new restaurants to eat. So I try to keep very busy, both during the workday and outside of work.
I love that. You're so well rounded. I mean, you got the traveling, you got the I ain't afraid to do things on my own. You're visiting places, you're doing some cool things. What has been your definition of PR thus
Mhm.
far? And what do you think PR has done for your personal life? So a lot of the stuff that you do,
Mhm.
what I've noticed is we think different about life's instances, right?
Yeah.
The way that we kind of process information and enjoy things, most of the time it's from a PR lens. So talk to me a little bit about what PR is to you and how it has kind of shaped the world that you live in now.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think for me, I mean, you have like the kind of textbook definition of public relations, which is, an organization communicating with its publics, which I think is very much true and critical for any brand or organization that's trying to reach out, appeal to, and build relationships with their target audiences. I think for me, like the key word of public relations is relations. It is how we communicate, it is how we process and get information. It's how we understand the world around us. And so I think some of the key ways of doing that is, of course, media and news. I think also like just in the world we're in today, digitally, I know for me personally, like the first thing I do when I wake up is check Twitter to see what current events are going on. What is kind of the commentary? What are people saying and thinking? And I know like just with working with a variety of clients on a day-to-day basis, especially in like the public policy space, it's considering that information, how do we use that, how do we communicate to our audiences, and particularly to lawmakers who we think can move issues in our favor, like what can we communicate to them, like our perspective on an issue so that they think about it. And if we're trying to say lower drug prices, of course you want to support like legislation that's proposed publicly that's going to do that rather than like legislation that won't. And so I think too, like a big part of like those relationships, it might seem like, oh, well, if you share a statement with a reporter that's geared to say an elected official, it might seem like, oh, well, you're not talking with that elected official directly. That might be the case, but then you have like potential, citizens who might be moved to write a letter to the editor. Folks will go on Twitter, and share what you said. And then also too, like if you have folks that are like testifying in Congress on why a specific bill should or should not be passed. So I kind of see it in a way. I think for me, like when I just started out, I was like, well, I really want to learn more about media relations. It seems like a very interesting, fascinating field. But now I kind of see like every little piece is connected, from ads to, say op-eds to, just a tweet. So any way you can communicate and get folks to pay attention and care about and ultimately move things in your favor, I think is all, a part of the wonderful world of public relations.
So it's perspective. In essence, PR for you and the lifestyle that you live, it intersects at perspective. It gives you opportunity to see things in a different way. And I want to make it clear why that's important. When we're pitching stories, sometimes they don't pick up on maybe that first pitch, right? You have to have perspective to see how you can pivot or give a different perspective based on the coverage that you're trying to get and the ability to get it to resonate with whoever you're pitching it to. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, Miss Tanya. And Miss Tanya, I think one thing that I've thought about sometimes, like just, when I think about the work that a lot of my clients do, because a lot of them have been focusing on like, trying to move policy forward on the issues of like, say affordability of drug prices or, a guaranteed income, trying to improve the living and working conditions of low or middle income Americans. And I'll just tell you, like, I remember one time, I think in Politico, there was some kind of, discussion about where the different elected officials in Congress stood on, like, say, things like unemployment or, getting, I think it was like the American Rescue Plan. I think it was that bill. And I just recall like just reading it. And I said to myself, I'm not really seeing, like, to me, it just kind of seemed like a back and forth. Well, this is what this member of Congress said, or that's what this member of Congress said. And then I thought to myself, what about like the average person? Like if a person, needs another stimulus check to make it through this pandemic, which is so tumultuous and uncertain, what about their perspective? So I feel like, in a way, like working in this industry, it's just, I think in a way, it's just kind of elevated my ability to be like a more critical reader of the news and like a critical thinker, and to kind of, like you said, consider new perspectives and think about, whose ideas and whose thoughts and opinions on these key issues of the day might be missing, even with, reporters trying to, incorporate as many views into an issue area as possible, especially where public policy is concerned.
Absolutely. So it kind of goes back to my thought on how we should be looking at civic organizations, right? They should be looking at themselves as a brand. They should understand their brand value and their brand proposition, because the things that they do should support their values and their mission statement, right? And I think it's really difficult a lot of times for them to recognize why they should look at themselves as a brand, and also why PR is important, especially the smaller nonprofit organizations. Tell me about your work with smaller nonprofits and how you get them to embrace the process of PR. Because one, if they're small, their budget is probably small, which means they don't have a lot of resources for PR, but they need it. So kind of talk me through your process in getting them to understand and accept that process and how it works.
Yeah, sure. So I think one thing that's really helpful, and I know there's a guy on LinkedIn named, I think his name is Perry Hedrick, and he writes more about like public relations, like from the perspective like the B2B space. But one thing that I really like that Perry always says is that, especially if you're working like at a PR agency and you have clients, that you should really see that relationship with your clients as a partnership. And I think once you have that relationship kind of solidified in that sense, I think that nonprofits, for example, no matter big or small, are more likely to trust your advice and your insight and just your knowledge on the area. But I also think too, another key part of that partnership, like you said, Miss Tanya, is being fully aware of going into it, just the limitations. So as you had mentioned, a lot of like smaller nonprofits, and I mean, we work with small nonprofits, personally, I have them as clients. They might have the restraint of like not enough money or not enough time. In a lot of cases, they might not even have like a full-time communications person on staff. That might be a situation in which their employees are kind of wearing many different hats at once, and they may or may not have the time to devote to it. And so I think that the fact that like they would even hire us to work with them as their clients in the area of communication, I think that's like a good step in and of itself, because they understand on some level the value of communication. And I think by like regularly meeting with them, talking with them, just explaining to them like what the media landscape is, what could be newsworthy that they're doing, what might be something that they might want to, kind of park into a later time until there's something in the news cycle that they can kind of connect to in a more effective way and build those relationships with reporters. I think that that's all ways to communicate and show them the value of PR. And I would also say another thing too that I've really learned myself is like not promising media coverage. Media relations is like a big part of my day-to-day job. And I've had situations with clients where they're like, well, can we get media coverage on this? What are you doing? And I think for me, it's like I want to try my best to get them that media coverage, if it's possible. But I would never tell a client like, oh yes, this will definitely be something that the news media will cover, because I think it's dishonest, and I think it also kind of cheapens like what the role of media relations should be. And I think too, it kind of minimize like the work of reporters. Like reporters are not at my beck and call. They're more so like they're supposed to see us as a resource and you as a client as a resource for being an expert in your field of interest. But also, I think it's just like a reciprocal relationship where you build that rapport, you offer them, useful information if and when you have it. And when the time is right, you may get that media coverage, you may not. But I think as long as you're building those relationships, as we've said multiple times, like that's the most important thing.
I love that. So, with what you've said, talk to me about, especially because we're talking about politics, nonprofits, yeah, but more or less politics and civic organizations. They tend to get themselves in a little trouble sometimes. So, from a crisis PR perspective, when they screw it up, because sometimes they do, what is your best advice to them and the operations in regards to moving forward to correct that? How do you correct course with nonprofits and civic organizations?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, if you make a mistake, I think that a nonprofit or civic organization could come clean, should admit, yes, we made an error, we're sorry. I think they should, like, if someone is actually hurt, I think you should acknowledge that hurt. You should come off as empathetic as possible and mean it. Don't say things like, I forget that football player's name who wasn't vaccinated and said, I'm sorry if this was an offense to people who don't agree with my views. I think that's a big no-no. I think that communicates that you're not empathetic, you're not willing to consider other people's perspectives, especially in the midst of a deadly pandemic where if someone catches COVID and then passes it on to someone else, a person might actually unfortunately pass away. So I think that empathy is key. And I also think too, not only do you apologize and acknowledge where you went wrong, but I think you also need to be upfront and open and honest about how are you going to correct course going forward. Because I think if you just give an apology, that's great and all. But if people don't see, okay, what's next? What are you going to do to correct those wrongs? They might not be as open to trusting you. So, you have to really be clear about what are the next steps to right your wrongs and to be that trusted source of information, or someone that, potential supporters can feel confident in donating to, volunteering on behalf of, maybe contacting, say, members of Congress on behalf of as well. So, it's those three things: admitting the wrong, coming off as someone that cares about your audiences and how they may receive the bad that you did. And then, like I said, last but not least, taking it forward and correcting your wrongs so that you come out stronger and you are trusted and respected, because as you had mentioned before, I mean, image is everything. And with these civic minded organizations, a lot of times it's not just about, building a profit. It's about, advancing some type of social cause in some way. So people really need to see that you're going to be doing that in a crisis, and not.
One of the things we talk about often is being authentic and not performative, right? How do you advise your clients to be authentic in the stands that they take and not just performative for when the block is hot, right? So when things are popping off, then they want to jump into the fire and pick a side or do something performative to make themselves look good. What is your best advice to your clients when social issues come up, instead of just jumping in because they want to, be seen in the moment, rather than being authentic about their brand, who they represent, and how they are seen in the public eye?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, Miss Tanya, one thing with last year, like amidst the George Floyd protests, I personally thought it was just so fascinating how it seemed like out of nowhere, like the word, like the keyword DEI came out. And I think it's a great thing that like diversity, equity, inclusion are all, topics that more people are caring about and really want to wrestle seriously with. But I think before you say like, oh, we want to have like a DEI statement, I think you have to step back, especially like as a nonprofit or civic minded organization, and think about like what are the dynamics, like, and particularly the power dynamics within your workplace. Like, yes, if you want to share Black Lives Matter as like an all white organization, that's great. But then I think you have to think about first, how come as an organization, especially if we're supposedly like a nonprofit, we're community based, how come there's no people of color? How come there are no women? How come there are no LGBT people, for example? And I think that stepping back in that reflection is so key. And I think when you say, for example, in that case, hey, our hiring practice, our organizational culture has not been conducive to this DI goal that we've had, and we're going to change that. And I think once you really, admit that up front, you actually do things to show that you are trying to diversify, say your ranks, for example, and elevate voices that have typically been marginalized or unheard for so long. I think that's a really good way of showing that you really do, walk the walk. And I think too, Miss Tanya, I don't know if you also remember, like when COVID had just started, like in the very early days, all of these different brands, companies, nonprofits, they were sending everyone emails about what they were going to do to protect folks from COVID. And that to me also came off as disingenuous. It's like, okay, Bath and Body Works, it's great and all, but you're not a public health organization. So I think too, you also have to acknowledge like, hey, maybe we should stay on our lane on an issue. Maybe we uplift those who are, in the thick of things, who are working on issues of racial justice 24/7. Elevate them, share what they're doing with your audiences, and broaden that conversation, and truly include people.
One of the things that I stand on is the fact that I think brands need to start with a cause that they champion, something that they can authentically get behind and stand behind and do the work that shows that they support a particular lane. So whether it's something that's, child oriented, youth oriented, elderly oriented, minority oriented, whatever it is that complements your brand that you can constantly stand behind, it's important that you make that distinction early. So when things start happening in the social environment, you don't feel a need to have to jump in the fire. If you already have a proven track record of supporting a particular cause, there's no need for you to jump in every single cause that comes up, because then you do look performative. If you are authentic about the work you do, then you have a proven path, right? You're not just someone that every time something happens, I need to do something. Your brand should have something that you champion on a regular basis. So when those things come up, and then when something comes up in your lane, you can say, this is where we stand. Mm-hmm. And you can see this path of work that we've been doing over the last 10, 15 years to champion this particular cause, rather than now this thing happened, so we have to jump in. Actually, you don't. When you brand correctly and your brand is strong and bold, you do not have to jump in every single social issue that comes up. Stay in your lane. It's perfectly fine, but don't be causeless. Don't have nothing that you stand behind. You're just in a community, you get all their money, they're supporting you, and then there's nothing you give back to. Don't be that person. Don't be that person. Don't be that brand. Don't be that organization. Okay? Don't do it. So pick something that really resonates with you, your company, your organization, your value statement, your mission, and then stand strong in that. You know, Personally, I have a friend that when social issues come up, and we've talked about her wanting to be in politics later in life, right? But when issues come up, she's very kind of wishy-washy, very kind of political. She straddles the fence on things. She says something without making a strong statement. Talk to me about your thoughts on it being okay for you to take a stand on issues, it being okay for an organization to take a stand if they're firm in that. What is your advice to organizations or people that you do work for in regards to where they should stand on their opinions and things of that nature?
Yeah, I think it's very important for, whether it's a corporate brand or a nonprofit, or even I think, especially like a lot of my clients who are like, say, 501c4 nonprofits, where they are very overt about, supporting legislation or elected officials or not. I think, like I said, like and like you had said, like it's just so critical to have people know where you stand, and not even just that, but like live those values. So
Mm,
if you are the type of organization where we're like, yes, Black Lives Matter is important to us. LGBT people are important to us. If that's a problem to you, if you're quote unquote triggered by it, then you might not want to fraternize our business. We want the business of people who, come from different communities, because we know that that inclusion makes us stronger and better. And I think when you make a stand on things rather than just kind of straddle the fence, I think that people will respect you, even if they don't agree.
right.
Right. It's like, even, okay, for example, Chick-fil-A. Like I know a lot of people, they love Chick-fil-A. They love those chicken sandwiches. Now I have my reasons for why I might not support Chick-fil-A politically, but at least I know where they stand. And
Right.
from that point, I can determine, do I want to spend my dollars with them or not? Whereas Facebook, every time I hear or see Mark Zuckerberg on TV, he's always saying, I want to connect people. I want to connect people. And yet you had like that bombshell report from that whistleblower who used to work there, who was like, the company knew that, say, their app Instagram was damaging the self-esteem of about 1 in 3 girls, I think, who were using this site. And yet on one hand, they're always talking about, connecting people from all over the world. And she even went as far as said that they were backing dictatorships or genocides or just repressive societies in general. And it's that kind of two-facedness that I think led a lot of people to not only, roll their eyes when Facebook said that they were going to rename themselves to Meta. It also led people to just kind of delete the app altogether. And so I think that those are the kind of things that stick with users, just in the long term. That Facebook had posed itself as one thing, it's been another. And then from the get-go, even before Facebook was like a bona fide company, it was created as a site for men like Mark Zuckerberg to rate women that they went to class with. So, you just had like the misogyny embedded in that. And there wasn't really any kind of institutional change in the company. So now I think its reputation has really been shot.
Inconsistency will kill your business before taking a stand. Like being inconsistent goes against everything that a good business is supposed to be about. So we're supposed to be trying to get to know, like, and trust you. Being
Mhm.
inconsistent makes people what? Not trust you. And that for me is what that company has been doing. But that's any company. When you become inconsistent about who you are and what you're saying you're about, I'm jumping ship because I can't depend on you. That's why people have loved Coke and McDonald's forever. They ain't lying, but they do give you a certain feel. They tell you the truth, and most people still support them. Oh my God, imagine that. They still support. Imagine telling the truth. What a novel idea. What a
Well,
novel idea.
and Miss Tanya, I mean, even I'm sure you remember like a few years back, like I think Starbucks had like those cups talking about white privilege. And I don't know if you remember all the brouhaha about that. And people were like, oh my God, why are they doing all this social justice woke stuff? Which I hate that that term woke has just been totally appropriated from our community.
I'm over
Um,
it.
let me tell you.
I'm over it.
So, but like even that, it's like, okay, even if a person like doesn't fully agree with Starbucks, it's like you know where they stand and you know that okay, Starbucks seems to present itself as a fairly progressive, open-minded company, forward-thinking company. And I think in the grand scheme of things, if someone really wants some coffee, they're probably going to stop at Starbucks because they've made their stance clear that we want and we're open to as wide a clientele as possible, right? Whereas, like, say if I'm at the mall, like I was just at the mall this evening, and I understand fully well that like I am not the clientele of say like maybe Gucci or Louis Vuitton, right? But it's like I know that whoever is their audience, the upscale, people with high income, like that's for them, and that's okay. So yeah, that's important.
It is. I just have a hard time with the dishonesty and the deceitfulness of certain companies. Just tell us who you are and let us decide if that's what we want to be a part of or not. One of the things that I think is hugely important, some kids, I speak to youth groups a lot, and the last group of kids I was in, she said, what is the most important thing that you've learned in your adult life? I was like, that you can disagree without being disagreeable. Like you can disagree with people. If you communicate well, you can express how you feel and what that makes you think of or what resonates with you,
Mhm.
and still be someone's friend or acquaintance or whatever. Everything doesn't have to end in bloodshed or disrespect because we are different. We come from different places. Our backgrounds are different, and we are all a culmination of our experiences. So if I haven't experienced what you've experienced, I'm going to look at things differently. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean we can't work together. It doesn't mean I can't respect you, but it does mean I don't agree. And that's not how I live my life. But if
Mhm.
I so choose to still be your friend, that's fine too. But
Mhm.
people these days, they leave things in such a all or nothing connotation that you just can't, we can't get it right. And these companies aren't being honest because they don't want to lose the finances. But at this point, I'm like, but you've lost respect. Like if I see you in the streets, I don't even want to shake your hand. For what?
Mhm.
For what? So I
That's
don't know.
so
It's interesting stuff, but what is one of the most difficult PR clients that you've had over the years? Walk me through that, and how did you kind of remedy that or just end it? I don't know.
Yeah, so I would say that I personally don't feel like I've necessarily had like difficult clients. In big part because like I'm very new to like the agency life. But what I will say though, I mean, I have had experiences where I feel like there were certain like power dynamics, like on like say racial and even like gender lines that have come up with clients. And I found that in those situations, like being upfront and honest with like first like my colleagues to say, hey, I noticed that like if a client seeked consultation on something and didn't listen to a woman as much as like they did listen to like a man's advice, like that is something that we should take note of. And then even like going to the client directly and saying, hey, like, you recommended this thing and you wanted it to be targeted to say like, a marginalized community. That might not be the most appropriate subject or spokesperson or
Mm,
whoever. And I think in those cases, the clients have been grateful. I mean, maybe it felt like throwing ice cold water at the situation, but you saved them embarrassment, you saved them a hurt reputation, and I think you saved them ultimately like fostering an environment of distrust. And I think just Miss Tanya, just going back off your point on like deception and looking at Facebook or Meta as they call themselves now, when Facebook was being deceptive in its practices, it didn't just affect people on the app. I think it's also harmed a lot of human relationships. I think it's harmed, especially how young people view themselves and what role they have to play in this world. So it's not just your bottom line, like you said, that matters. It's how you relate to the world. And I think if we can't see people's basic humanity, if we can't affirm people, even if we disagree, but if we ultimately cannot affirm and just have that basic respect for other human beings and who they are, then I think that the work we do becomes much harder. And we essentially create an environment where we don't fuel better communication, but we're leading to, a more, negative society and way of life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, look, before we get out of here, let the people know how they can keep up with what you're doing. If they want to tap in with you about nonprofit organizations seeking public relations help or, comms help, but they might not have a great budget or they're not sure if they should, engage. Talk to the people a little bit and let them know how to get in touch with you.
Yeah, sure. So you can find me on Twitter. I am JLF_comms. I talk a bit about communications, but mainly about politics, just because that's what I'm very passionate about, both in and out of work. And then, if you're looking more so for, like, say, public relations, communications related advice, particularly for your organization, I recommend that you check out my employer, www.upshiftstrategies.com. So that's all one word.
I love that. Now, we didn't get into this, and maybe I definitely think I'm gonna to have you back soon. But yeah, she be on fire for politics on Twitter. I love it. It's not many people that I can keep up with and that can keep up with me that is on fire about most of this stuff. Tell them why Twitter. Most of the time, I'm trying to get these people off of Facebook, off of these other apps, and get on Twitter. Talk to them about why you're on Twitter real quick and kind of like your style on Twitter because they think, well, I don't have 1,000 million followers. I don't know what to do. Tell them to get on Twitter and why.
So I would say one reason why I like Twitter a lot is because it's a great way to just fuel conversation. And I think first and foremost, that's how I met Miss Tanya herself. I met her. I met Michelle Garrett, who's like a giant in our field, especially with like PR freelance practitioners, and also Miss Tamara, who does like a lot of legal PR work. So that's how I met all three of you ladies. I kind of feel like y'all are like the holy trinity of sorts in our space, which is wonderful. And I'd also say too, I mean, look, I personally do not have like a ton of followers on Twitter compared to like other accounts, I think, especially in the politics space. But I find that, because I'm open and take a stand on things, and I try to back up what I'm saying with like facts and information that, can uplift people and educate and inform people. I find that in many cases, I'm oftentimes like retweeted or liked or share dialogue with like much bigger accounts than I could even imagine having. And it's been interesting because I know that there's a woman named Leslie Mack. She does like a lot of like digital organizing work. And I remember, hearing her talk about on a podcast, like when Black women talk openly about political issues, just the problems like harassment and targeting that they might face. And so that's something that like I feel like in the back of my mind, like I'm like, oh my goodness, like if I get too big on there, could that be my fate? And I know just like with talking about the Kyle Rittenhouse stuff and say mentioning his victims, I noticed some people had just shared all this stuff. And in those cases, I was just like, I'm just going to block these people and just really only engage with folks that are really trying to have a conversation. So even if we don't agree, I feel like, at the end of the day, I mean, do we want to live in a world where you can be gunned down for exercising your First Amendment constitutional right to, freely and peacefully assemble? I think most people, if they think about it, would say no. And so if you don't like that, that's on you. But, for those who are trying to build a better world, I'm always open to engagement anytime.
Yeah, girl. And I'm psychophobic. So I'll block somebody in a quick minute.
Yes.
Like, did he just say, oh, let me get blocked, okay? Don't be disrespectful. Have a conversation, try to learn something. And if you have the opportunity to educate someone on something, then bring it. And I think that it's okay to engage in healthy dialogue. That helps us. That allows for us to be better and see things in a different what? Perspective. We are always looking for perspective because our job is to frame things in a way that will garner support or at least a conversation because we think it's newsworthy or it's important. And if we miss an angle, then we miss the opportunity to have our stories resonate with the public. So, yes, bring it, come through, but don't be disrespectful because, yeah, I'm psychophobic. I ain't got time for that.
And also have fun, right? I mean, I had, during my whole trip, I had tweeted about being in San Francisco at Disneyland, and like, folks had commented on that. And so it's just like, be human, don't always feel like you have to put up this front. I mean, be respectful, don't be cursing people out and saying things that, would make your employer blush. But just kind of show people like who you are. And I think the more authentic you are and unapologetic in just who you are and where you come from and where you see things going, I think that's where, you really draw people into you.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to have a social media personality, okay? You don't have to be two different people to be on social media. It's totally not a thing. It's not a thing. So, thank you for taking the time to talk to my people, talk to your people about PR, what you're doing, what it is to you, and why it's important in your life. I appreciate you, and hopefully, I'll be able to get you back soon. But I always know where to find you on Twitter.
Totally. Well, thank you again, Miss Tanya. And you know what? Have a great holiday week with your family. I know if there's anyone who needs some rest time, it is definitely you. So, and just thank you for all that you, Michelle, and Tamara do with our PR Lunch Hour community each Friday.
That's right, guys. So next Friday, because we're taking this Friday off, feel free to stop in on Twitter. Fridays at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Pacific. So you can have coffee with me or you can have lunch with them. Either way, show up. It makes for a great conversation. Hashtag PR Lunch Hour. Thank you guys so much for being here.